Ever wondered what a real cyber attack looks like, from the inside? Well, today, we're doing just that. We're going to tear down the entire playbook of a known threat group, piece by piece. Let's get right into it.
Now, just so you know where all this is coming from, everything we're about to cover is pulled straight from the public MITRE-ATT&CK framework. If you're in cybersecurity, you know this is the gold standard, the real deal knowledge base. It's basically the blueprint for how these threat groups operate.
Right? We hear about hacks and data breaches all the time, but how do they actually work? What are the moves they make? That's what we're doing today. We're pulling back the curtain and looking at the exact tactics, techniques, and procedures of one very specific group.
So who is this group we're putting under the microscope? Let's get acquainted with our subject, a cyber threat group that goes by the name Transparent Tribe.
All right, so who are these guys? Well, according to MITRE, they've been around since at least 2013, so for over a decade now. And they're not just randomly hacking people. Nope, they have a very specific focus, gathering intelligence from some seriously high-value targets. We're talking diplomatic, defense, and research organizations, primarily in India and Afghanistan.
And, like any good spy outfit, they don't just stick to one name. In the cybersecurity world, you'll see them pop up under a bunch of different aliases. Things like APT-36 or Mythic Leopard. Honestly, the fact that they have so many names just goes to show you how many different security organizations are keeping a close eye on them.
Okay, so every single attack, it doesn't just start with a malicious email out of the blue. Nah, it begins way before that. It all starts with preparation, what MITRE calls resource development. Think of this as the phase where they're in the workshop, building their weapons and setting up their infrastructure.
So, first things first, they need a place to operate from on the internet, a digital home base. And this first technique, acquire domains, is pretty straightforward. It's exactly what it sounds like. They go out and buy up domain names that they're going to use later on in their attacks.
But here's where it gets clever. They don't just grab any old random domain name. Oh no. They specifically register domains that are designed to mimic legitimate websites. So think of a fake government portal or a file-sharing site that looks totally legit. The entire goal here is to trick you, to build a false sense of trust with their future victims.
Okay, so they've got their fake websites all set up. Now it's time to set the trap. This next move is called a drive-by target. And what that means is they basically turn these websites into digital minefields. A simple, unsuspecting visit from you and boom. That's all it takes to compromise your entire system.
And this is exactly how that trap gets sprung. They'll hide malicious links or even invisible web page elements, we call them iframes, right on the site. These are specifically designed to deliver their custom-built malware. In this case, it's a nasty piece of software called Crimson. It's a remote access Trojan, or a RAT, which basically gives them the keys to the kingdom, complete control over the infected computer.
All right, the stage is set. The traps are laid. So what's next? Well, now we move into the next phase, initial access. This is the moment of truth. This is when they actually make their move and try to get in, crossing the line from the public internet into the target's private network.
And how do they do it? Well, one of their go-to methods is a classic for a reason: spear phishing attachment. And let's be clear, this isn't your average everyday spam. No, this is a meticulously crafted email sent to a very specific person with a file attached that's been turned into a weapon.
And yeah, the intel backs this up. They lean heavily on this tried and true method. They trick people into opening documents that look completely harmless, maybe even important, like a report or an invoice. But the second you open it, you've let the malware in.
Now there's a slight twist on this same idea, and it's called spear phishing link. It's pretty much what you'd expect. Instead of a malicious file, the email has a malicious link. The con is exactly the same though, just get the target to click.
And what happens when you click? Well, that link doesn't go to a real website. It takes you straight to one of those fake, weaponized sites we talked about earlier. And that click is all it takes to trigger the malware download. It's a super direct path, right from your inbox straight to infection.
Okay, so they're in. The breach was successful. So, now what? Well, this leads us to the next big phases: execution and defense evasion. This is all about actually running their malicious code and, just as important, doing it without getting caught. See, just getting the malware onto a computer isn't enough. They have to make it run. And one way they pull this off is through something called exploitation for client execution. That's a fancy way of saying they take advantage of bugs and flaws in the everyday software you already have on your machine. Think about your PDF reader or your Office software. And get this, just look at these vulnerability codes, CVE 2012-0158 and CVE 2010-3333. In the world of cybersecurity, these are practically fossils. This tells us something really, really important about their strategy. They aren't always using super advanced zero-day exploits. They're preying on systems that simply haven't been updated. It's a massive blinking sign reminding all of us why patching our software is so incredibly critical.
All right, so how do they stay hidden? Well, they use digital camouflage. This next technique is called match legitimate resource name or location, and it's all about blending into the background. They disguise their malicious files to look like perfectly normal, boring system files that belong there.
And they're really good at this. They'll go so far as to copy the exact icons and names of real Windows directories. So to you, the average user, or even to some security software, their malware just looks like another part of the operating system. It's an incredibly effective way to hide in plain sight.
Now think about it from the attacker's point of view. You don't want to go through all this trouble just for a one-time peek. You want persistent access. And that brings us to the command and control phase, or C2. This is where they set up a permanent hotline back to their own servers, so they can control the machine whenever they want. And to make sure that hotline stays open, they use some clever tricks, like dynamic resolution. See, instead of calling home to a single static IP address, which defenders could find and block pretty easily, they use services that are constantly changing the IP address for their domain. It makes them a constantly moving target, which is way, way harder to shut down. And yep, the threat intel confirms it. Transparent Tribe uses this exact method. By using dynamic DNS for their command and control infrastructure, their C2, they make it a real headache for defenders who are trying to sever their connection to a machine they've taken over.
Okay, so we've just walked through the entire attack chain, from prep work to control. Let's take a step back and zoom out for a second. What does all of this tell us about their big picture strategy? Because this is where knowing the playbook really gives the good guys an advantage.
This chart right here, it gives us an amazing snapshot of their whole operation. And the thing that just jumps out at me is how balanced it is. Look at that. It's a nearly even split between getting ready, getting in, running their code, and hiding. This isn't a rush job. It shows they're patient, they're methodical, and they put real effort into every single stage of the attack. And for anyone trying to defend against this, it means there's no magic bullet. You have to be on your guard at every single step.
So who are they after? This is super important. This chart shows us they have known techniques for Windows, for Mac OS, and for Linux. What does that tell you? They're platform agnostic. They don't care if you're using a PC, a Mac, or a Linux box. If you're a target, you're a target. And that kind of versatility, that shows a level of sophistication that makes them a really dangerous and widespread threat. So, after tearing apart their entire playbook technique by technique, we're left with one really big question. What's the point? What's the main lesson we can learn from seeing an attacker's strategy laid out so clearly?
And honestly, it's this. By knowing exactly how a group like Transparent Tribe gets ready, breaks in, runs their stuff, and then hides, defenders can build specific, targeted defenses to counter them at every turn. It's simple, really. You can't defend against an enemy you don't understand. And this kind of knowledge, this is the absolute foundation of a strong defense.
So, there you have it. If you found this breakdown of an attacker's playbook helpful, do us a big favor and hit that subscribe button and give this a like. It honestly helps us a ton and lets us keep making more explainers just like this one. Thanks so much for watching.